Hi, my name is Ryan Hamilton. I'm 12 years old and in Kingsborough 4-H. This summer, my family is going to the East Coast because my dad's cousin's son is getting married. My parents said that we'd be visiting some historical sites in Boston, so we've been studying history to get ready for the trip. We just learned about Paul Revere's ride from Boston to Lexington and Concord. So I thought it would be interesting to share with you this poem called Paul Revere's Ride by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Henry Longfellow was an American poet who wrote this poem when America was on the verge of civil war. He wrote this poem almost 100 years after Paul Revere's ride. He wrote it in 1860. Paul Revere was a silversmith in Boston and a member of the Sons of Liberty. There were problems between the British Army and the colonists in Boston, so a plan was made to warn the colonists of the movements of the British soldiers. The plan was to hang lanterns in the belfry arch of the Old North Church so that the colonists would know, so that Paul Revere would know, if the British were coming by land or sea. Now, the poem is not entirely historically accurate, but it made Paul Revere into a legend and an American folk hero. The poem is told from the perspective of an innkeeper and tells of Paul Revere's midnight ride as he warns the colonists of the approaching British soldiers. Paul Revere's Ride by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. On the 18th of April in 75, hardly a man is now alive who remembers that famous day and year. He said to his friend, if the British march by land or sea from the town tonight, hang the lantern aloft in the belfry arch of the North Church Tower as a signal light. One if by land and two if by sea, and I on the opposite shore will be, ready to ride and spread the alarm through every Middlesex village and farm for the country folk to be up and to arm. Then he said, good night, and with muffled oar, silently rowed to the Charleston shore. Meanwhile, his friend through alley and street wanders and watches with eager ears, till in the silence around him he hears the muster of men at the barrack door, the sound of arms and the tramp of feet, and the measured tread of the grenadiers, marching down to their boats on the shore. Meanwhile, impatient to mount and ride, booted and spurred with a heavy stride, on the opposite shore walked Paul Revere. Now he patted his horse's side, now gazed on the landscape far and near, then impetuous stamped the earth, and turned and tightened his saddle girth, but mostly he watched with eager search the belfry tower of the Old North Church, as it rose above the graves on the hill, lonely and spectral and somber still. And lo, as he looks on the belfry's height, a glimmer and then a gleam of light. He springs to the saddle, the bridle he turns, but lingers and gazes to fall on his sight. A second lamp in the belfry burns. A hurry of hoofs in a village street, a shape in the moonlight, a bolt in the dark, and beneath from the pebbles, in passing, a spark, struck out by a steed that flies fearless and fleet. That was all, and yet, through the gloom and the light, the fate of a nation was riding that night. It was won by the village clock when he galloped into Lexington. He saw the gilded weathercock swim in the moonlight as he passed, and the meeting house windows, blank and bare, gaze at him with a spectral glare, as if they already stood aghast at the bloody work they would look upon. It was 2 by the village clock when he came to the bridge in Concord town. He heard the bleating of the flock and the twitter of the birds among the trees, and felt the breath of the morning breeze blowing over the meadows brown. And one was safe and asleep in his bed, who at that bridge would be first to fall, who that day would be lying dead, pierced by a British musket ball. You know the rest in the books you have read, how the British regulars fired and fled, how the farmers gave them ball for ball, call from behind each fence and farmyard wall, chasing the redcoats down the lane, then crossing the fields to emerge again, under the trees at the turn of the road, and only pausing to fire and load. So through the night rode Paul Revere, so through the night went his cry of alarm to every Middlesex village and farm, a cry of defiance and not of fear. A voice in the darkness, a knock at the door, and a word that shall echo forevermore, for born on the night wind of the past, through all our history to the last. In the hour of darkness and peril and need, the people will waken and listen to hear the hurrying hoofbeats of that steed and the midnight message of Paul Revere. In my introduction, I told you that this poem is not entirely historically accurate. Two things that I learned were Paul Revere was captured, questioned for information, and then released. Another thing I learned was that Paul Revere did not actually shout, "The British are coming!" He did not actually shout at all, because it was supposed to be a secret mission. And most people thought of themselves as British at that time, so it would not have made much sense. What he actually said was, "The regulars are coming out." I hope you enjoyed this poem by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Remember, he wrote this poem when America was on the verge of civil war. He intended for the poem to be a call to action, reminding supporters of the Northern Union that history favors the courageous.